afternoon. Welcome to Drive Time with me, Andy Goldstein, alongside Jason Cundy. And of course, if you're joining us now for the first time, maybe you're unaware, we broke the news on talkSPORT just around about 12:30 when that news broke. We learnt the very sad news, the passing of a footballing great and a Liverpool superstar, a Liverpool legend as well. Roger Hunt sadly passed away, aged 83 years of age. Of course, on a day like this, when we have such sad news, it's always great when football fans want to talk about maybe their memories, talk about their feelings, and it's good to share them. It's good to tell the world maybe a story when you met Roger Hunt and perhaps the rest of the world doesn't know. We'd love to hear from you this afternoon. And it's also good to talk in these dark, and they are dark times for a lot of people that never knew him because he was such a superstar. And back in the day, people felt they had affiliations with footballers because they felt so close because they were in their front room, they were on their television. So if you want to talk about it, we'd love to hear from you this afternoon. 08717 223344. Let's start the show by talking to another legend, another Liverpool legend, who played over 500 times, of course, played for England on many occasions. The wonderful Jamie Carragher joins us this afternoon. Jamie, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Joe.
Afternoon, Andy. Afternoon, boys.
Thank you so much for coming on, Jamie. I really appreciate it. Listen, before I kick things off with the obvious questions, just tell us a bit about how you're feeling today, because I mentioned it at the top of the show that, you know, football lost a great, but Liverpool have lost an absolute legend, a real superstar. How are you feeling at the moment? Are you okay?
No, listen, it's a sad day for the club. It really is, and for Roger's family more important than anyone else. And yet, of course, I'm sad when I hear the news. But I always feel when something like this happens, you have that sadness, but then you also have that smile on your face in terms of it gives you that opportunity to look back. You know, it probably happened a few weeks ago, maybe for Spurs and Chelsea fans. We're obviously sad at the news about Jimmy Greaves, but then you hear all the old stories, you see the old goals, and it just brings a smile to your face, and you think how special a footballer Roger Hunt was, and obviously other players that obviously pass at different stages. And I just think it's probably sad that it takes something like that for us sometimes to really look back and appreciate people at different times. But that's the nature of life and the world the way it is. So yeah, a sad day, but also a special day in some ways where you can really you really appreciate how special a footballer he was, and maybe I don't appreciate how special he was maybe for England in some ways. Yes, he won the World Cup, but I think when you're a Liverpool supporter and you think of Roger Hunt, one of the last things you probably think about is probably the World Cup in '66. You just think of actually what he did for your own football club, and maybe that's a little bit different being from Liverpool. I always think of obviously the lads who played that West Ham were a huge part of 1966, and they're almost champion for that. But at Liverpool, it was always about bringing the league title back in '64 and '66. Scoring a goal and bringing the FA Cup back for Liverpool for the first time, which was massive at the time. Liverpool had never won the FA Cup. They were always, I think, wound up at the time by Everton fans because they'd never won the FA Cup. So that was a huge moment for the club, and he was at the forefront of so much of that. So yes, of course, it's sad, especially for Roger's family, but it is lovely just to look back and think of how special a guy and special a footballer he was.
Jay, I've been looking at all the tributes and watched them come in, not just on Twitter, but on Sky Sports as well. And he was part of what makes Liverpool what they are today. Tell us a little bit about the man and what his legacy is going to be at Liverpool.
Well, his legacy for me is that at Liverpool, I always say this as a player, certainly as a player who came after someone like Roger Hunt and Bill Shankly in the great 60s team, it's very difficult to ever do anything at Liverpool that hasn't been done before, because we're very lucky you play for a successful club and you've got all these legends before, and that word is used a lot at our football club, and rightly so. As I said, there's been a lot of success over the years, but for me, when I think about the Liverpool legends, I always think of the 60s team, because where is the club without them? Well, it has to start somewhere. So, Roger Hunt actually comes before Bill Shankly. I've just been hearing him, talking before there, Roger, a past interview in terms of the effect Bill Shankly had on him in terms of what he did for the club. But, no matter how good a manager you are, you think of Jurgen Klopp right now, he still needs Mo Salah to score the goals. Bill Shankly still needs Roger Hunt to score the goals, So you always need that figure. And for me, Liverpool legends are those players then. I think of Ian Callaghan, Ron Yates, Ian St. John, obviously unfortunately as well as his strike partner, who got that winning goal in the 65 Cup final against Leeds, passed away obviously not so long ago as well. And they, for me, are what Liverpool are. Loads of people come after them, players, managers, myself included. But when I think of Liverpool, I think of them.
Mm. Let me ask you, his legacy at Liverpool, it's unquestionable. I just wonder with England, do you think he doesn't get enough recognition? Maybe he's an unsung hero, because when you look at England, that 66 World Cup winning side, you got, obviously the likes of Bobby Moore, the names that jump off the page, Geoff Hurst with the hat-trick, Martin Peters, you got Nobby Stiles dancing the jig, etc. But when you look at Roger Hunt's record in that tournament, he played in all 6 games, he scored 3 goals, an integral part of that, not squad, but that starting 11. Do you think he's not recognised enough?
Maybe not in some ways, because it's always the Jimmy Greaves, Geoff Hurst sort of scenario. But the one thing you've actually got to think about there, you're talking about 2 legends there in Geoff Hurst for what he's done in the World Cup final, and Jimmy Greaves possibly being the best goal scorer this country has ever seen. But no one ever mentions that Roger Hunt's place was ever up for grabs, so it was never a case of it could ever be Geoff Hurst and Jimmy Greaves. So I think that tells you how much of esteem he was held in by probably Sir Alf Ramsey at the time, that it almost felt like, well, it's Roger Hunt and one other. So that thing tells you everything you possibly need to know. I think possibly also playing for Liverpool, and I mentioned that earlier on. As I said, you'd think of the 3 players, Geoff Hurst, Bobby Moore, Martin Peters from West Ham, and it's almost, in West Ham supporters' eyes in some ways, West Ham won the World Cup, and it's a big part of their history of, we had the England players, whereas at Liverpool, there's always listen, probably not the time to go into it, but there's always a funny sort of relationship with maybe the national team at times, and it's always seen as, Liverpool was the number one, and that was always my feeling as well. So maybe from his own supporters, absolutely loved him, who christened him Sir Roger Hunt, it was always about Liverpool. It was never them sort of shouting from the rooftops about what Roger Hunt did in 66. What Roger Hunt did in 66 for football from a Liverpool point of view would be winning the league title. So that would be what Liverpool supporters would think of as 66 and Roger Hunt, and maybe obviously they're his biggest supporters, and they're probably not, on the bandwagon in terms of maybe the World Cup. It's more about what Liverpool did. So maybe there was something in that.
Jay, for those that didn't watch it, I'm one of them, I'm guessing you are as well, but there's plenty of our listeners that would have done, but there's also plenty of listeners that wouldn't have watched him, wouldn't have seen the type of player that he was. Can you liken him to someone now in the modern game that we can identify him with? You say he was a little bit like that type of player.
Well, he was a guy at the top end of the pitch, and I mentioned his partnership before, and that's probably something we don't see so much in football now in terms of strike partnerships. And Ian St John would be what you would call maybe your number 10 now, who played just behind or not, was the out-and-out goal scorer. But Roger Hunt's job in that team was to score the goals. And if you actually look at him, a really good-looking, elegant guy, always looked like not a hair out of place when he played. Now I'm just trying to think off the top of my head what type of player he was, but he was quite tall, he was quite lean. You think of I'm thinking of someone like that now as a number 9 in terms of maybe like a Lewandowski type, quite tall, great physique, and he just, leads that line. And he gets the goals for that team. And as I said, I think in those days it was always a 4-4-2 and 2 players right up front. But Ian St John's role, I think, in that partnership was possibly slightly different to Roger Hunt. His job was to chip in with the goals. But when you actually look at the numbers and you think of some of the great strikers Liverpool have had, and Roger Hunt has still got the most league goals for Liverpool, more than Liam Rush, Robbie Fowler, obviously Luis Suarez and Torres and Michael Owen, all these strikers weren't at the club as long, but to still have that, accolade, and you think that's probably something that's never going to be beaten in terms of the league goals he's got for the club, is something special.
Let me ask you, since the news broke, actually, Jamie, we've been very lucky. We've had a fantastic guest list of people that knew him, from Jimmy Tarbuck to George Cohen, and they've told us some wonderful stories about the person and the player away from the pitch, away from the training ground, etc. I just wonder what your memories are of him.
Well, I possibly met Roger Hunt maybe 10 or 12 times just through functions, or maybe seeing him in a Legends Lounge after a game at Anfield. And as I said, I can't, say I knew him too well and had some great relationship with him, but I was always in awe of not just Roger Hunt, but, Ian Carragher, Ron Yates, St John, all these players used to, float around the club at different times. in different lounges, and you'd see them at, functions for Liverpool. And I always had that sort of sense of respect and adulation for what they'd done, because of they started what we were in the club. And I was also very mindful that, without being disrespectful in some ways, that a lot of the new players, certainly foreign players, maybe we're not aware at times, who Roger Hunt was or who St. John was when you're talking about players signing for a club 30, 40 years later. That's not a criticism of the players, but, the foreign players, they haven't grew up as Liverpool supporters. So I always tried to speak to them and almost make a fuss of them in some ways, to let them know that I knew who they were, really, because, as I said, the way, squads are now, there's players from all over the world, and that's football. So I always tried as best I could to, make conversations, speak to the players, and let them know that we were so respectful of, of what they'd achieved for the club.
Now, Jay, it's going to be an emotional night tonight. Of course, Liverpool travel over to Porto. They're already there. They kick off later on tonight on talkSPORT 2. It's going to be a very emotional night for the players, and in particular the fans that have travelled out there and the ones that are watching at home. How do you think that it's going to go tonight? How do you think that the players are going to deal with that, the fans are going to deal with that? Because the black armbands will be out, no doubt.
Yes, and I'm sure those supporters going over there, I think possibly the first European trip where fans can go now. So I know a lot of the lads who've gone over there. So I'm sure they'll be raising a glass to Sir Roger, as he's affectionately known by Liverpool supporters. And I'm sure that there'll be the minute silence. You've got the words of Klopp. It's fitting in some ways that it's a European night, and that's what's synonymous with Liverpool. And the one thing I always feel about that 60s team, and Bill Shankly as well, is that they deserved the European Cup, that team, for what they did for the club and where they brought it to. But Roger actually scored in a European final, in the Cup Winners' Cup, I think in '66 against Borussia Dortmund. I think it was in Hamden, I think, if I can remember rightly. Liverpool unfortunately lost, but he's still, possibly one of the few players, or there's a few of them who've actually scored in a European final. But just for Liverpool to be involved in a European game, which is what probably Liverpool are famous for in some ways, and they can almost, celebrate and cherish, the life of Roger Hunt, hopefully with a win tonight.
Jamie, listen, I'm sure your phone's been ringing off for other people to get you on to share your views here at talkSPORT and on Drive. Of course, we really appreciate your time. Very kind of you, Jamie.
Cheers, Jay.
Cheers, Jay. Cheers, Anne. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, man. Our pleasure. There you go. The wonderful Jamie Carragher giving us his views on the late and certainly great Roger Hunt, who sadly passed away earlier on this afternoon, aged 83 years of age. We would love to hear from you, football fans, not just Liverpool fans, but if you've got a story you want to share or just your views on how great a player he was, that's why we're here. It's always good to talk. 08717 22 3344. This is Drive on talkSPORT.